right. Thank you all for being here today. I want to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Task Force for Racial Equity in Criminal Justice. We have a great agenda, and before we dive into the first part of that agenda, I wanted to give a couple of updates. First, I wanted to let folks know, to the extent you don't, that we've been busy with our learning series. Last month, we held a session on adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as ACEs, and the criminal justice system, that relationship. We did this learning series in conjunction with the Chief Justice's Task Force on ACEs. And I want to thank in particular the co-chair of that task force, District Attorney Ben David from New Hanover County, for his partnership in that presentation. And if anyone was not able to join that learning series, I highly recommend that you watch the session on YouTube. It's on our YouTube channel, and Greg will drop a link to that session in the chat now. So I heartily recommend. Our next session is going to be a week from today on Friday, July 22nd, and it's going to concern fines and fees. There will also be a link in the chat so that you can register for that event and watch it in real time, although again, it will be on YouTube when it's finished. That session is going to focus on ways that fines and fees impact the courts, local and state governments, and individuals and communities who are burdened by often unpayable financial obligations. And then the last pre-notice has to do with our monthly clips emails. I just want to draw your attention to it in case your email box gets full. Staff prepares this and disseminates it to the listserv. Every month, we are compiling both news articles and grant opportunities that are relevant to the work that we are doing on the Task Force for Racial Equity in Criminal Justice. There's a wealth of information on how local governments are engaging in this work in a variety of different ways. And if you want to find past emails that are summarizing all of these things, you can again follow a link that's going to be put into the chat. So now we're going to move on to the first section of our agenda. That is the work that we're doing together to try to live in safe communities where everyone is treated fairly. That is communities that are free from violence. We want to do everything we can to keep our friends, neighbors, parents, and especially our kids safe. And I think we recognize that violent crime, specifically gun violence, is an increasing concern to all of us. And there's reasons for that. In 2020, North Carolina had a 31% increase in gun deaths over the previous year, 2019. That was larger than the national increase of 25%. And according to North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, almost 5 North Carolina residents die from a firearm gun injury every day. About 1,650 people died in 2020 from gun violence. Additionally, there were nearly 4 times that of people who went to emergency departments in North Carolina because of firearm injuries that, thank goodness, were non-fatal. This is frankly predominantly a male problem. From the provisional 2021 data, males who comprise 49% of the total population made up 84% of firearm-related emergency department visits. Almost half of firearm deaths are homicide, slightly more than half are suicides. There were 871 firearm suicide deaths among North Carolinians in 2020. That represented a 12% increase over 2019. The vast majority of homicides that occur in North Carolina involve a firearm, more than 3 out of 4. Firearm homicides increased 32% from 2019 to 2020, totaling 715 in 2020. Mass shootings nearly doubled in 2020 from 11 to 20 in 2020. Guns have become the leading cause of death for children and adolescents in America. For the first time in 2021, gun-related deaths surpassed motor vehicle crashes as the top cause of death for those under 19 years old. The last data we have in North Carolina is from 2020, not 2021, but in 2020, child firearm deaths increased 88% from 2019. It went from 56 to 105. And of those 105, 66 were from assaults, up from 36 the year before. We're seeing a dramatic increase in the number of guns confiscated on school grounds. Last year in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools alone, dozens of guns were found and confiscated. Now, I'm pleased that we've seen some movement at the federal level to try to keep guns out of the hands of dangerous and impressionable people. But the recent measure that passed through Congress, frankly, was only a half one. Some of the legislation's successes depend on states like ours choosing to expand and enforce red flag laws. These are laws which enable family and friends to petition a court to have a gun removed from a loved one who poses a risk to him or herself or to other people. In addition to red flag laws, there are other things we can do to reduce gun violence here in North Carolina, including comprehensive background checks to keep guns out of the wrong people's hands. It is harder to buy a Sudafed than it is to buy a gun at a gun show. We need to raise the age to 21 to buy AR-15s and other semi-automatic rifles. Today, a young person cannot buy a beer or a cigarette until he or she is 21 years old, but can buy an AR-15 at 18. We need to promote safe gun storage. Storing a firearm safely, locked and unloaded can greatly reduce the risk of firearm injury and death, especially for our children and youth. And we have a ways to go, unfortunately, because among the 43% of North Carolina adults who keep a firearm in or around their home, over half of those folks do not store their firearms safely. In addition to common sense gun measures, part of our holistic response to the uptick must include TREC's recommendations for violence interruption programs. On the local level in cities and counties across America, including many here in North Carolina, communities are recognizing, like the CDC has, that the effectiveness of treating violence like a gun, like infectious disease. Law enforcement has a critical role to play in our fight against violent crime, and we have to support those efforts. But our communities need additional tools to respond effectively. There are interventions we can do today to prevent the next act of violence in our communities. For these interventions to succeed, they need excellent technical support and community buy-in. And that's why I'm so pleased for our speakers today. First, we have Greg Jackson of the Community Justice Action Fund, and then he will be followed by two Wilmington residents, Cedric Harrison of Port City United and Judge Jay Corpening from the 5th Judicial District. And we'll start now with Greg, who will talk to us about 20 minutes. Greg, thank you for being with us.
All right, I'm here. Can you hear me okay, Attorney General? Awesome. Thank you so much for your leadership and commitment to this issue. But also, thank you for your commitment most recently with addressing ghost guns in North Carolina and stepping up on that really important issue. I do have my audio running from another phone, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay, and we'll get rolling. I'm Greg Jackson. I'm the Executive Director for the Community Justice Action Fund. Also, my family comes from Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, so all my Northeast folks, greetings to you all. But also, I'm here as a survivor of gun violence. I was shot in April of 2013 and learned firsthand, unfortunately, how devastating this crisis can be to individuals, but also how little is being done to address gun violence across the country. And so we, as an organization, we have been focused on ending gun violence, specifically in Black and Brown communities, by prioritizing strategies that empower those who have been most impacted and really focus on the people and not just the hardware strategies, but what are the people-centered or public health approaches to reduce violence. So I'm here to share a little bit about what we are presenting as far as addressing gun violence and some of the successes we've seen along the way. So give me 1 second to share my screen. Hopefully you can see that. Thumbs up. Great. All right. So the first 5 years, or the last 5 years, frankly, we've been working pretty intensely to elevate the crisis of gun violence and address a lot of the misconceptions about how gun violence is impacting Black and Brown communities. One of the biggest misconceptions is that this is a crime problem only. But when you look at homicides in the Black community, 70% of homicides are not connected to another felony crime. Another hot button term you'll hear is gang violence, but statistically, only 11% of homicides in the Black community are connected directly to gang violence. So what does that tell you? That tells you that just like any other community, gun violence is showing up as a public health crisis and showing up diversely in how it's impacting individuals. With that said, there's a couple key stats I'll share here, not to be repetitive of the Attorney General, but a couple additional ones is since COVID, we've seen a 35% increase in homicides nationwide and 39% specifically in the Black community. And we've seen that while homicides impact communities of all backgrounds, 74% are from Black and Latinx communities. And so it's important that we focus and prioritize solutions that can uniquely support and help those communities navigate this crisis. But what is a public health approach to what we deem a public health crisis? Fortunately and unfortunately, we have all experienced a public health approach to a crisis, and that's been from what we've experienced with the COVID-19 crisis, where we first looked at how do we treat and address those who have been directly impacted? How do we reduce the risk factors that lead to the spread of that disease? And then lastly, how do we address the root causes that created it in the first place? And we think with violence, it's no different. We have to first start with treating and supporting those who have been directly impacted by violence. And that starts with victim services and survivor services, but also includes street outreach, violence intervention work, hospital-based violence intervention work, and then also healing and trauma-related services and programs. And we know that if we invest in these, we can see drastic results. Certain cities across the country have seen upwards of 60% reduction in violent crime in their cities just by prioritizing violence intervention practices and strategies in their areas. But then we know that we also have real risk factors that lead to violence, whether that's the lack of economic opportunity, overwhelming access to firearms, or even challenges or loopholes in our criminal legal system. So we are pushing first and foremost to invest and prioritize violence intervention, but then we know that a holistic strategy must include addressing those risk factors and ultimately working on the root causes that led to that, whether that's housing conditions, physical, emotional wellness, or even economic and educational inequalities. But today I'm just going to talk about violence intervention because we could have a whole lecture on all of this. So with community violence intervention strategies, one of the big things is to know about this is that these strategies target those who are at most risk to violence. We know that 40% of those who have been injured or killed within 5 years will be shot again, killed, or unfortunately become an offender. So by focusing on those who have been directly impacted is a huge way that we can reduce the likelihood of retaliation. But we've also seen that in most communities, less than 2% of the population are connected to 80% of the violence. So we're talking about a very small population that we need to treat and focus on to make a very major reduction in violence in our communities. So there are 4 key evidence-based models that have been impactful across the country. And there are actually a few more out there, but these are the most common. One is violence intervention, where you have either someone in the community or in the hospital that are intervening conflicts before they become fatal, that negotiate ceasefires and even treaties between groups if there are group-related violence, but most importantly, shifting the norms around conflict resolution and culture. The second major one, which I mentioned earlier, are support services that focus on survivors of violence. So whether that's providing them with relocation services, providing them with therapeutic care, employment support, or even additional financial resources, we know that the proper treatment and support of survivors can have a drastic impact on their likelihood to retaliate. I know for me, when I was shot, unfortunately, I was given medical care. I was given crime compensation funding to help pay for my medical bills, but that was it. You know, there was no one there to support me through the therapeutic process, through the 6-month recovery, and frankly, to help me process what happened to me and to live a healthier lifestyle. But most importantly, no one was there to help navigate me into a safer community or a safer living environment to avoid that offender coming back for me, frankly. So it was a very vulnerable and scary time for me as a survivor. And I imagine others that are survivors on this call can relate, but it's definitely something that we see well too often. Another major evidence-based model here is cognitive behavioral therapy. These are strategies that take proactive means to make small adjustments to behavior to hopefully shift folks towards a healthier lifestyle. So what does that mean? That means helping folks with life planning, helping individuals who maybe have a violent history or maybe are at risk to being harmed in the future with housing changes, with supporting them through employment, guiding them through gaining therapy and therapeutic growth and healing. And we found that programs like this, a great example is called Advanced Peace. Advanced Peace has seen 30 to 40% reduction and also seen a 90% plus success rate in all of the folks that they bring through their program of them not interacting with violence in the future, but also not interacting with the criminal legal system at all in the future. So these programs are really impactful. And then the last one is ecological systems focused approaches. So programs that focus on the entire neighborhood. A good example is Life Camp in Queens, New York, where after a traumatic shooting or incident, they will go in and provide trauma treatment and care for all those who may be indirectly exposed or impacted by violence to make sure that that experience doesn't negatively inform how they deal with conflicts in the future and that trauma and violence doesn't spread. So I'm gonna pivot a little bit. So those are just a few models. We can definitely, again, we could talk all day about those models and their impact. But what I will share is that there's a lot of federal investment in these strategies as of late. There was $250 million in the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that was passed only days ago for these types of strategies. In April of 2021, the president signed executive actions to include funding for these strategies in 26 existing grants. And in the fiscal year 2022 budget, there was also $50 million dedicated to these resources. Lastly, the Department of Treasury and the Department of Education both presented guidance that in response to COVID-19 and with the American Rescue Plan funds, we should prioritize the usage of these funds for violence intervention and prevention programs as a way to fight back against the overwhelming increase in homicides. Lastly, here, I want to share with you all is that here are all the federal funding and resources that exist. Again, there's a lot of opportunities that exist out there, but it will take the support of cities and states to fight for it. And I see the Attorney General squinting, so hopefully it's not too small and font. Sorry, A.G. Stein. But feel free to screenshot this. But there, again, there's 26 executive actions that have opened up funding. The American Rescue Plan, we've seen $2 billion in local funds committed to this across the country. So places like Michigan just committed 150. Philadelphia just did, I believe, 104 million. So we're seeing a huge trend across the country where cities and even counties in rural areas are committing some of their American Rescue funds to invest in these strategies. Again, we talked about the fiscal year 2022 budget. There's 50 million in the Department of Justice's OJP budget for these resources. And then also there is Medicaid coverage. The policy for Medicaid coverage has been adjusted to ensure that those funds can also be used for these services. And that may require some county-based or state-based tweaking as far as your policies in state. But federally, that has been approved and agreed upon by leadership there. And then lastly, members of Congress have also used their congressional earmarks or community project funding to invest in these strategies. We've seen 45 million awarded across the country. In places like Durham, we've seen Congressman David Price even invest in these strategies with Bull City United, the local street outreach violence intervention organization there. So what is it that you can do to help? A couple major things that we strongly recommend is that, again, we prioritize existing and future government funds to invest in these strategies. We know that there are local resources through the American Rescue Plan. We imagine there'll be more resources as we continue to fight through COVID and really consider how you can integrate your violence prevention strategy in your COVID response, understanding that they're directly connected. We encourage you to use those American Rescue funds, plan funds, but also we encourage the state leadership to unlock more resources and funds for these strategies. And then lastly, if as many entities as possible, identify someone in your mayor's office, or in your division that can lead some grant outreach and grant writing opportunities, because as we're seeing more federal resources, that is a huge opportunity that we can take advantage of in North Carolina by just pursuing the federal funds, which is literally in the billions now of resources that we can take advantage of. The most ideal way to do that is opening an Office of Violence Prevention, having someone dedicated on your team who can build out the full comprehensive plan, that can pursue these grants, can manage these grants, and then last but not least, oversee and manage the efficacy of those grants. So I hope that was okay. I hope my audio wasn't too bad there. But those are just some key things we wanted to share on how we can address gun violence, taking a public health approach, in addition to a lot of the more hardware and gun access measures that we know the legislature is considering and fighting hard on. So thank you so much. And I'll definitely pass it back to the Attorney General.
Well, Greg, thank you for providing that excellent overview of these initiatives across the country and what the national funding opportunities are and how those come down to the states. What we're going to do now is transition to what one of these initiatives look like on the ground level. And we're going to focus on New Hanover County, Wilmington, and we're pleased to have both Cedric Harrison from Port City United and Judge Jay Corpening, again, from the 5th Judicial District. Cedric, I think you're starting, but I don't know if you and the judge organized how y'all are going to break up your time. Again, we'll do about 20 minutes on this part of the presentation.
Thank you, Attorney General Stein. This is Jay Corpening, joining you in that curious blend we live in now, where I'm doing remote hearings and in-person stuff today. So I'm sitting somewhere on the interstate outside of Raleigh, joining you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes giving you sort of an overview of our county response, and then Cedric, who's boots on the ground, is going to do a deep dive into Port City United, our new county department. So, you know, community violence is impacting our communities across the state, and in New Hanover County, that's certainly true. It's been happening over an extended period of time, but it really reached a tipping point in the second week of school last year when we had a shooting that happened at New Hanover High School. That was not a school shooting. It was a shooting that happened at school. It was community violence that spilled into our school, and it galvanized our community. And our New Hanover County Commission and our New Hanover County Board of Education came together in a couple of joint meetings, really became committed to addressing this issue, convened a series of stakeholder meetings that were led by our strategic planning folks in our county, government, school focus groups, and community focus groups. And the county listened and planned. And what's resulted is a 3-year investment of $39 million in our community in response to community violence. Port City United is a significant piece of that, and Cedric is going to talk to you about the different components of that. It's based on Cure Violence Global, but New Hanover County has come up with its own model built on the underpinnings of Cure Violence Global. Some of the other pieces of our puzzle are that our county is designing and building a grocery store on the north side of Wilmington in a food desert. One of the things that we've learned in conversations with our District Attorney Ben David, the social determinants of health are the same root cause of crime. We've got to take care of our community as part of responding to community violence. The grocery store is going to be operated by our partner, by Northside Food Co-op, one of our partners. So we're excited about that. 4 new school resource officers are going to be going into our 4 of our elementary schools downtown that do not currently have SROs. We're arranging threat assessment training for all of our SROs. Our Elements program, which is a response to gang violence that's worked within our sheriff's office for a number of years, is expanding. We've had a waiting list for years. That waiting list is going to be eliminated. The expansion is much needed, and we're excited about that. Our Community Justice Services Department operates a Too Good for Violence program in our middle schools. That's being expanded into our high schools to address social and emotional needs of our children beyond middle school. Our county's adding 6 additional pre-K classes our county currently funds, and this is independent of New Hanover County school funding. County is funding an additional 6 pre-K classes that will add capacity for an additional 90 children in pre-K programming. As part of this effort, the county is working to expand capacity for our nonprofits that have evidence-based programs to help combat violence and provide wraparound services to individuals and families. That's a $1.2 million investment that the county is making, and that'll begin in the next fiscal year. Also in the next fiscal year, 14 additional SROs to make sure that we have a school resource officer in each school. And I'll tell you that our school resource officers are well trained. We have a school justice partnership in New Hanover County, and this will not result in an increase of referring kids to court, but will provide additional security and relationship building in our buildings. Also upcoming in the next couple of years, the design and build out new school incorporated in Wilmington. All of you, or most of you, know Frankie Roberts in Wilmington, who's been doing reentry work for a number of years. Frankie has conceived the idea of a boarding school for 15 to, I think, 20-year-olds. City donated an old fire station, and the county is rehabbing that. And then the county will continue to invest in capital and operating expenses. In the last of the 3 years, the county will be investing in higher education by partnering with Cape Fear Community College to cover cost of attendance as well as transportation, childcare, and other expenses for older students and adults who need that extra step to become more employable. So those are some of the components other than Port City United that our county is investing in. But the key point, the focal point of our investment is in Port City United. And I'd like to turn it over now to Cedric Harrison, who's the executive director of our new county department, Port City United. Cedric?
Thank you, Judge. Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Cedric Harrison, the new director of the new department for New Hanover County, Port City United. For those of you that, or I guess I can just kind of pick up from where Judge left off at, the Port City United umbrella was established, like he said, after a shooting happening at my actual alma mater, New Hanover High School. And so when they implemented this entity, they wanted to create an organization, of course, that wanted to de-escalate violence. But we wanted to have a very, very, very different approach from how, things are addressing violence currently here in Wilmington, which is just really from a law enforcement standpoint. And so for Port City United, we really wanted to try to address violence, not as a root cause, but more as a symptom, and really get around to root causes where we feel like individuals that choose a moment of violence usually feel like they have nothing to lose. And so we wanted to try to be able to really push giving individuals things to live for. And so Port City United has 3 different components and 3 different approaches of how we really just provide wraparound resources, really going back to Greg's presentation, talking about how they can provide services for individuals to try to get them out of their situations. And so a lot of what he was saying, we do really mirror some of those models that he was talking about. So we have 3 different components of our department, 3 different divisions or what have you, that I'm really actually thankful that the county set it up for like this, because our first division of our model directly stems and mirrors from the Cure Violence Global model, which is a wonderful model created and started out of Chicago, which I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with. I know in the Durham area, they have the Bull City United that's been operating for a few years. Also in Greensboro, they have Gate City Coalition that's been operating for a few years. And I've actually went up to go and canvass both of those different sites and really get on the ground and get the feel of those of what those work environments felt like before we came and started Port City United. And I'll transparently say that I feel like New Hanover County is leading the way in these efforts. As if you just look at the finances first and foremost, I'm looked and found out that the Cure Violence Global Model, based out of Greensboro, maybe only has about $500,000 annual budget, and I believe the one in Durham just was raised to maybe about $1 million. Where here in Wilmington, ours is a $5 million budget, and some of the things that we're actually doing here in New Hanover County, I don't think they do in any Cure Violence Global Model around the nation or the globe. And so I'll continue to go ahead and break that down. Our first one directly mirrors what any Cure Violence Global Model is doing all around the globe. And we do have a street team, like Mr. Gregg said, individuals that are in the community. Their office hours are not in the office. They only come in the office to check in at the beginning of the morning and then check in the evening, but they spend the rest of their day in the most highest areas of crime and violence. But the individuals that we hire to be present in those environments are actual natives or leaders or very relatable, credible, suitable individuals that are very comfortable being in those neighborhoods. And they can identify individuals that are quote unquote or term high risk, which are most likely to do a shooting or be shot, and start working with building trust, building a bond, and then working on providing wraparound resources to try to change that individual's life and mindset. And all of those resources can go from a list of things. Greg has shared some of those to you, from mental health to housing to transportation to jobs, education, all of the above. We have individuals that are on boots on the ground, trying to connect with individuals, and immediately if an individual exercises or acts, for a certain resource or to get connected in a certain direction, that individual, that violence interrupter, is right there on the ground to connect them with the outreach worker that's already on the ground with them as well, and they start doing case management right there in the community. Another level of work that those violence interrupters do, they also mediate situations. Like Mr. Gregg said, we have individuals here right now in New Hanover County that have stopped individuals from shooting each other and continuing to carry out a beef or a disagreement. We have been able to settle and resolve a few different incidents. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to solve everything, because some things are isolated and one-off and stem from other different areas. But as far as making the community safer and getting ahead of potential danger, the work is being done and is being done at a high level. And so that model directly models the Cure Violence Global Model. And we have 8 individuals in that division of the department, 1 supervisor, 4 violence interrupters, and 3 outreach workers. And then next, what we have is something that I haven't seen on any scale of the Cure Violence Global Model, and that is a 24/7 resource and support center. So no matter what time of the day, no matter what day it is, an individual in the community can call our hotline, 910-798-4444. And literally we have somebody right there on the phone, ready to answer the phone and ready to connect them with any resource that they're looking for. And not only can they do that, but they also can leave the office and be mobile. So for example, we had an individual that was in a domestic violence situation and needed to get to a shelter and didn't have a ride. And so we had a case manager that was able to still be on the phone. We had a connect specialist. That's their proper title. We had a connect specialist that was able to still be by the phone, and then another connect specialist that was able to leave out, take our vehicle, and go pick that person up and take them to where they needed to be. We also have gotten calls and stuff like that for individuals that have wanted meals, foods, things of that nature, and we've had to be able to utilize our vehicle to go and deliver those proper meals and things of that nature. But those are just really small. Those are some really low-hanging fruit stories that we've done. We have some bigger things that we've been working on. Found out about an individual that was in a community that had went to school for 3 years and had to come back home because of hardship, and then Hurricane Florence, and then COVID, and never got back into school and was kind of going down the wrong path. But before they fully committed around path, we were able to raise enough money to pay for the debt that they owed to the old school, and we have a connection with UNCW, and that individual will be getting back in school and finishing their education. And so we have many stories like that with the individuals that are boots on the ground doing that work. We also have built a relationship with the housing authority. When I went to go and canvass the site in Durham, their office is in one of the housing authority projects in Durham. We have our own office with the county, which I think is a big bonus because it provides a little bit of inspiration. I think but we do have our office, or we will be having an office in one of the most high crime areas. That's one of our focus areas. And we did establish that relationship with Women's House Authority. So if an individual isn't comfortable or our violence interrupters aren't comfortable yet with putting that individual in their car or taking them somewhere, then we can meet them right there at this location in that neighborhood and start working on either bettering their resume or looking for jobs or filling out an application or whatever it is that they may need. We don't have to try to bring them to the office or take them out of an environment that they're not comfortable with. We can meet them right there in their environment and start doing that type of work. And so the violence interrupters, like I told you, that mediation team is 8 individuals. The actual 24/7 resource connect center, we have 13 individuals. And so that's 1 supervisor. That's Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And then we have 4 groups of 3, and it's broken up into 12-hour shifts from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. And that's holidays, rain, sleet, hail, or snow. And then our last component or division of our department is our CRCs, or community resource coordinators, or what I like to call / because when you're from the community and you're in the schools, just like a coach, a coach is more than just a coach to an individual at the school. Well, so is a caseworker that's at the school. They're a big brother, a big sister, a mentor, guidance counselor, caseworker, and all of the above. And so we have 22 individuals that are in our tier 3 schools. That's 1 high school, New Hanover High School, middle school. So we're in DC Virgo, Williston, and then we're also in the elementary schools as well, like Snipes, Rachel Freeman, Forest Hills, and Forest Hills, Snipes, Rachel Freeman, Williston, Hanover, and I believe that's it. I think we're trying to add another one, but for right now, I believe that's it for right now that we have. And so with those individuals in the schools, we can connect and grab little Ray that may have been wearing the same outfit 3 days in a row or something like that, and kind of bring them in the office and see what we can need or handle or address or try to provide for him. But we're also not just trying to bring quote unquote at risk, because I feel like all kids are at risk in any predicament. They could be at risk individual. And so we're not just trying to look for the individual that may be failing classes, something like that, but individual that may just be making C's or B minuses and just getting by and maybe getting overlooked through the cracks. We want to also be able to give resources and boost that individual up so that they can be a leader amongst their peers. And so outside of those 3 different components, we are building a relationship with the hospital. We do have a representative there. They're not paid through us though. They are represented through the hospital, and we are working with them to try to establish a relationship wherever an individual comes into the hospital and they are, a shot or a victim of gun violence, that we can be able to try to get that moment with them, because during that time is one of the most easiest times to really be able to connect with the individual. They're very vulnerable during that time, having a life-threatening experience. Just like Greg, I've also am a victim of gun violence. Actually, 3 months ago, I was shot in my face. I came out of recovery straight into this job. And so the work has been refreshing to get back on the ground. And we've already been doing a lot of things that are instrumental in the community, but also personally instrumental to myself as well. For example, we have an initiative called Bright Lights, Peaceful Nights, where we actually have been going through the neighborhoods and identifying some of the most darkest areas, and letting the city and Duke Energy know that these areas need to be provided with lights. For example, where I was shot at, I looked directly in the direction of my shooter's direction, and I could not see or identify the shooter because there was no active or working street lights on that street. All I saw was the flashing lights. And so literally the first 2 lights that will be going up will be on the street that I was shot on, and that will be going up in maybe a week or so now. But our team that works in the neighborhoods, on the weekends, their hours do come towards the nighttime. They work like a 2 to 10 shift. And so they also have been canvassing and taking pictures of dark areas. And we've actually been able to identify 3 or 4 areas that either needed lights or the lights haven't been working forever or were outdated. And then not only the lights, but, just, in underserved areas, under-resourced areas, sometimes they can be forgotten about. So it was a whole forest that needed to be kind of chopped down and things of that nature that we were able to put a highlight on. And so that's another one of our engagements. And then we also have an event called Fresh Chance Friday that we will be championing, where it's basically a all-out resource fair, from providing voter registration information to hepatitis B, HIV, mental health screenings, to jobs that we're doing interviews right there on the spot, helping with resumes, to also talking with lawyers to help get charges expunged off of their records so that they can have a better chance of opportunity at getting the job or moving ahead. And so right now, like I said, you take the 8 individuals on the ground, 13 individuals in the Connect Center, and the 22 individuals in the schools. We have a powerhouse of about 45 individuals. And honestly, here in Wilmington, that's been one of the first time that we've really seen a lot of attention really being followed up by a lot of resources on addressing these issues. And then also, of course, with the great intro from Judge Corpening, we've also been able to establish relationships to help with with case managing and mentoring and follow up at the divergent programs, and really being able to connect with those individuals that are working on that second chance.
That was great, Cedric. And I'm so grateful both you and Greg were not killed by the gun violence, and that you were able to turn that experience into something exceptionally positive for the community as well as yourself, I'm sure. But what you all have going on in New Hanover is remarkable and very frankly inspiring, and hopefully a model for other counties across North Carolina. We have about 10 or 15 minutes for discussion. So I want to open it up to the task force to ask questions or offer your ideas to any of our 3 speakers. So have at it. And maybe you can use the raise hand function or identify in the comments, or just start speaking. We're a small enough group. You can also just start speaking. Justice Earls.
Yes, thank you. I just want to jump in first and thank all of our presenters. This has really been amazing amount of information and so powerful. I do have a question for Cedric, and thank you so much for your work, and your overview of what you're doing there is so incredibly impressive. What I want to ask about is whether there are, in addition to documenting the efforts that you are engaged in and the success stories and the lives that you change, are there any particular metrics that you're using to demonstrate the effectiveness of these programs? Like, is there anything you're measuring and over time can say this shows the impact we're having?
Yeah, great question. So overall, at the end of the day, we like to be really classified and looked at as a resource hub. So ultimately, our biggest measure that we're looking to be to keep up with is, how many people are we able to actually connect with resources, and what type of resources does that look like? And then to go into a more deeper detail, the way that we document those numbers, our Cure Violence Global folks, so our 8 violence interrupters and the mediation team, they solely operate off of the Cure Violence Global model, which is a private network, because we felt like some of the individuals that we may be working with wouldn't trust us if they felt like, we were keeping a public record of some of the work that we were doing with them. And so we were able to join the Cure Violence Global database. And what's a little bit special from those individuals that only document their work in the Cure Violence Global database is that not only do they record what type of resources are they able to connect, but they do also record every type of mediation that they do, even if it's a mediation attempt. So one of our numbers is just calculating how many mediations we've done. And then another number is how many mediations were able to be resolved, and then how many mediations were unresolved, or are still pending. Like we may still be working on trying to resolve this issue. So those are some of the numbers that we do calculate. And so that Cure Violence Global model is one way that we document it. But then from a 24/7 resource connect center, and from our CRC standpoint, we collect all of our database through the Salesforce program and platform, and we collect all of the data: how they found out about us, when they found out about us, what day of the week they called, how they called, just to try to identify those things. And then also we also keep up with, of course, the ShotSpotter information and data. So where shots are at, how active shots are, and of course, outside of shots, also just measuring, the level of violence that's happening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Cedric, a question about, you talked a little bit about being in the schools there in the county, the different work that you're doing there in the schools. Is that, how do you coordinate with SROs in doing work like that? How do you navigate the responsibilities of other people who are already in schools along with, and make that fit into the work that you're trying to do in the schools?
That's a really, really good question. Unfortunately, the school model, so I started this job about 90 days ago. And so for my first 90 days, we were working on creating a mission statement, vision, principles, doing all of the hiring of the 45 staff members. So unfortunately, we actually just started in schools literally this week. One of our year-round schools just started about 2 days ago. So currently, we don't have a structured and concrete approach of partnership or collaboration with the current SROs that are in school. But we are keeping a high alert on and trying to figure out a way of doing that best. So, but for the most part, we're really more so trying to partner with the guidance counselors and the other resource coordinators or individuals that do that type of work in the school, and trying to kind of slightly a little bit stay away from some of the officers, because we don't want the kids to feel, like talking to us could potentially, increase the potential of them, having to deal with law enforcement.
And I'll add, as part of that response, the folks that Port City United have in schools live within 3 of our nonprofits in our community that were already doing work in schools. And so this was an expansion of their role. For example, communities and schools that already had an active presence had added capacity as part of this project. Our Voyage program, which was originally our Blue Ribbon Commission, already in schools, and this expanded their capacity. And then Link Incorporated, that I mentioned earlier, also already in our schools and expanded their capacity. So we identified nonprofits that were already had those connections in schools and expanded their capacity with this specific work.
Thank you for that, Judge. I forgot to shout out our 3 partnering nonprofits. Yeah, so those individuals that are in the schools are hired directly through the nonprofits in a partnership with us.
Great. Deborah?
I just came to say hello to my fellow New Hanover County residents. Hi, Judge. Hi, Cedric.
Thank you for that. I'm sorry, go on. I have a question for Greg. I mean, to me, this approach that New Hanover County has developed is impressively comprehensive and wide-ranging. Is that typical in other parts of this country, or is their approach somewhat atypical?
No, I think what they're doing is very typical. We're starting to see a new wave of kind of mid-size and smaller size cities starting to adopt a more comprehensive strategy. But cities like Milwaukee, for example, have had an Office of Violence Prevention for 3+ years and have launched street intervention, school intervention, and are building out their hospital-based intervention. In Baltimore, they have a citywide Office of Neighborhood Safety, and they have a hospital-based network. And then on top of that, they have a community-based network that are all doing violence intervention and working with direct services and survivors. I was able to work in the DC office for a couple years. And I think that office was started in 2016, but we had a city-specific department that was working directly with survivors. We granted out resources for street intervention, and then we also granted out resources for hospital-based intervention. So it's actually very common at this point. And a lot of major cities have stepped up and started to invest in this. I know that Raleigh, North Carolina just committed $2 million to launch their own efforts there and start to build out their own violence intervention program and Office of Violence Prevention. Durham has Bull City United, which I think is a direct partner to Port City United. So this trend is moving. We've seen it around really since the 90s in certain areas of the country. And we've also seen it be very effective since then as well. So hopefully that's helpful. And we're actually launching a report on August 5th that will have a report of the top 50 cities most impacted by violence and break down what programs and what strategies they are investing in. And kind of frankly giving them a scorecard on how well they're doing. So if you can keep up with us, we'll make sure that everyone here gets that report and you can get a snapshot of who's doing what and how it's working.
Yeah, we will definitely be interested to see that. All right, we've got 4 questions and we'll just take them in order of my screen. Kerwin, Natalia, representative, and then the judge. And after we get through these 4 questions, we'll move on to the next part of the agenda. So if in the answers y'all can be direct and tight, that would be helpful.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Cedric and Greg, for those presentations and the work you're doing. I just got one question specifically for Cedric. The work that you guys are doing, it seemed like a robust and a lot of different programs. And so do a lot of these programs function outside of law enforcement, meaning law enforcement have no intervention in these programs? And if so, what is the importance of that and what successes have you seen working external of law enforcement when implementing these programs?
Yeah, so the Care Violence Global model that was adopted to birth Port City United has an international rule of really not directly working with law enforcement. We don't want to feel like, we don't want any individual that we're trying to, bring along or what have you to feel like if they make a mistake or say the wrong thing that we'll pass them right along to law enforcement and continue to increase the numbers of mass incarceration. What we're trying to do is actually keep individuals from being locked up and trying to do everything we can to help change their life around so that they can move in the other direction. And so we feel like if we have a very public and a very close and transparent relationship with the police, that it would make individuals in the community maybe distrust us and would never even be able to put us in a position to do the work of providing resources for them.
Excellent. Thank you, Cedric. Natalia?
Yeah. Hey, everybody. First, wanted to say thank you for the work that you're doing. I think creating momentum on this issue is huge. And Greg, you've done that at the national level, and Cedric and Judge, getting that significant investment locally is really amazing. Wanted to share one thing that, I'd love to see North Carolina get its own statewide Office of Violence Intervention, and we're working on that this year to be ready for next year. So Cedric, I'd love to connect offline sometime with you and others as we develop that proposal, really with the goal of trying to draw down as much federal funding as we can to North Carolina. But also had kind of a boring question for you, Greg. With that $250 million, I saw it went to HHS, and I don't know if you know or if it hasn't been released yet. Will that be like subawarded out to states? Will states have to apply, or will local entities apply directly, if you know?
So that 250 million is actually going to be in DOJ in their Office of Justice programs under what's called the Community Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative. They already have an existing 50 million that was, the deadline was late April. So they're adding an additional 50 for this year. And then the next 4 years over, there'll be an additional 50 as a result of that bill. As far as how that money will be pushed out, we're still waiting to hear the details. We met with DOJ on Monday, and I think they're still surprised the bill passed. So we should know in the next couple of weeks, but it will be from the Office of Justice Programs.
Thanks.
Thank you. Representative Maury?
Yeah, thanks a lot. Really appreciate it, Greg and Cedric. And Cedric, you mentioned your expunction clinic. Just real briefly, like, who are y'all partnering with? How many are getting expunctions? Any problems you're encountering?
Yeah, so that contract was actually just approved at not the last county commissioners meeting, but the one before that. I believe it was a little under $500,000 to partner with legal aid. But the process to bring those folks on hasn't started quite yet.
We're on the ground floor of this skyscraper that Cedric's building, which is exciting to watch. Judge Thornburg.
Yes, brief. I think my question with regard to the involvement with law enforcement was primarily answered. I assume that in an emergency situation, you would call them to go with you to an emergency intervention. But my other question was, how do you identify who the at-risk individuals are? And I know that could be problematic. I know many communities have a way of identifying individuals that are not allowed to be in public housing and various other issues that relate to that. And that can be fraught with who is an at-risk individual. So can you tell me how that would take place?
Yeah, so I think I said this a little bit in my presentation, that really any child is at risk. There were families of students that were students of New Hanover High School that when the shooting happened, thought that their child would be at risk to be around an incident like that, but it did make them at risk or what have you. But the more term that we usually use is high risk, and that's an individual that we feel like will be more likely to do a shooting or be shot. And that really is identified by, like I said, going back to the individuals that we hired for our out of the office team, our mediation and violence interruption team. They already are very credible, very suitable, already leaders in their community. And some of them have been justice involved already. And so they kind of already have an influence and have a connection with the individuals in their neighborhood to where they know more than anybody who may be the next individual that, may be interested in going down that path.
I also will just quickly add another great resource is hospitals. We know that victims of violence typically become the next victim or the deceased or even a potential offender. And so in many cities, they start with the victims first, then they build out based on referrals from the justice system or referrals from the community. But in most communities, just focusing on the victims will have a huge impact.
And then even just to follow up with that, to really give you a boost on the ground picture, some of our individuals that we hired would probably already know the person that may have been shot or what have you, they're probably already in the know enough to kind of know, kind of what's going on in the neighborhood, to know who has a problem with who, and who may have been around this person or said this thing. And, there's a lot of different one-off scenarios. But in general, a lot of these things kind of based from very petty incidents that lead to violence. And so our folks that we hired are very suitable and credible. That's one of the main things that we need when we hire individuals for that role. And so, yeah, a lot of these individuals that we hire already know the individuals that are very prone to this.
Thank you.
That's excellent. Yes, so informative. Cedric, Greg, Judge, thank you for the great work y'all are doing. And we're going to now transition to the next part of our agenda, which has to do with updates. And I'll start off with a legislative update, since the legislature just adjourned. During a short session, as you all know, the primary job that the modify the year budget rather than to engage in wide-ranging legislation. I mean, sometimes they do or try, but because it's more compressed, it's rarer that substantive legislation gets passed. So the focus of TREC had been in the budget, because that's where we thought we could have the greatest impact. And there were a number of budget provisions that relate to the recommendations that we made, and I'll highlight a handful of them now. There was funding successfully obtained for 2 non-sworn mental health professionals at the State Bureau of Investigation. And the idea is to help the SBI with the increasing number of case referrals that come from school resource officers and local law enforcement with people exhibiting concerning behaviors. And this type of work, as you know, ties into our recommendation about having alternative response models to incidents that occur. Funding was also secured for several specialized parole and probation officers who will support the corrections mission to reduce recidivism by addressing the needs of people on community supervision who have persistent mental health or substance use issues, to facilitate their access to services and programs that can help them successfully re-enter when they leave incarceration. And obviously, we're encouraged to see these positions be realized, because we have called for better mental health services in prison and for people under supervision, as well as increased resources for reentry programming more broadly. Funding was also provided for an extension of a new public defender's office in District 29A in McDowell and Rutherford counties, and other resources for the courts. There was funding for MAT services, medication-assisted treatment for people with substance use disorder in our jails. And the funds will go to the North Carolina Association of County Commissioners to facilitate local and regional strategic planning, technical assistance in relation to the opioid settlement funds that our office helped to negotiate. There's going to be $750 million coming to North Carolina to deal with the opioid crisis in the coming years, 15% going to the state, but the bulk of it going to local governments, 85%. And in this year alone, it's something like $93 million is going to be paid out. Again, the majority of that, vast majority of it going to local governments. So supporting issues like, or initiatives like MAT in jails is an excellent use of those funds. And of course, central to our task force work is bringing public health solutions to substance use disorder issues, and these funds will further that. Lastly, there was additional funding that was provided for school safety competitive grant program. This is a program that supports students in crisis and provides school safety training and safety equipment to schools. We continue to stress the importance of supporting kids who are in crisis through increased access to mental health services, emphasis on the right training for law enforcement when young people are in crisis. And so seeing this funding extended is encouraging. Also related to schools, the budget required local school boards to consult with teachers, school administrators, parents, law enforcement to develop policies governing student conduct and the procedures to be followed by school officials in disciplining students. And this relates to recommendations we made about implementing school justice partnerships and ensuring that school resource officers are appropriately trained in terms of how to handle discipline issues to reduce the referrals to the criminal justice system when they are unnecessary. So we appreciate these investments in public safety from the budget, but we're disappointed that the General Assembly failed to fund a number of other proposals that the task force made. Governor Cooper included in his budget proposal funding for several strategies that would create safer communities and fulfill recommendations that we made, including investments in evidence-based violence interruption programs, exactly like the ones that we just heard about earlier this morning. There was funding in the governor's budget for firearms safe storage and funding to help local law enforcement purchase body-worn cameras. So we appreciate the governor's leadership on this, and we will continue to push for these good ideas and others before the legislature in the next session and beyond. At this point, I'll hand it off for other TREC updates. We have about 20 minutes to get 4 updates, about 5 minutes each. The data committee will go first. And Ellen, do you want to take the first lead on this?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to give a little overview of our recent meetings. I will keep it short, and then I'll turn it over to Emily and Frank. So we've been busy these last couple months meeting with different stakeholders around the state who are working to improve both the quality and the public nature of criminal justice data in North Carolina. Also, several of our data committee members are either starting or continuing work on research projects that are directly responsive to TREC recommendations. A couple of examples of that recent work. We had a meeting where Jesse Smith and Andrea Sunsal at UNC's Criminal Justice Innovation Lab presented their Measuring Justice dashboard. I'm actually going to drop that in the chat so y'all can see what that dashboard looks like. It represents sort of a first of its kind look into court data in the state. It covers sort of a wide and a growing variety of issues that are key to TREC objectives, but also speak to court operations and court efficiencies. We're super grateful to Jesse and Andre for this work and for engaging with us. If any TREC members have feedback on this dashboard or the work of the Innovation Lab more broadly, I'm sure they would love to collaborate with us. So please take a look at that and let me know. Similarly, we've had GCC's Criminal Justice Analytics Center present to us their new Justice Data Portal. Similar format, they came presented and are looking for feedback and review of that dashboard. I'll drop a link to that in a second. They envision this portal as a centralized, interactive online clearinghouse of criminal justice data collected by agencies across North Carolina. So this is a super new project with a lot of potential for expansion. They have some plans right now, but I think are eager to get feedback from different individuals around the state. Therefore, GCC and specifically Michelle Beck, who I wish was here, but she's dealing with some family stuff, to stand up a data advisory group for criminal justice. Michelle's team would staff that, but they're looking for representatives from agencies and academic institutions throughout North Carolina's criminal justice and social services system to serve on that advisory group. I think this is a really excellent way to institutionalize the work of the data team. We're really excited to continue to build out this portal and then just work on other projects that are related to criminal justice data around the state. If you're interested in being involved in this group, please reach out to me directly and I can put you in touch with Michelle. I will now hand the mic over to Emily Coward and Frank Baumgardner to talk about a study that they are working on that is directly responsive to our TREC recommendations around juries.
Thank you, Ellen. We are working together, as Ellen mentioned, in response to TREC recommendation, particularly recommendation 91 around ensuring that we have diverse, inclusive jury pools in North Carolina. We have jury pools that draw from voter lists and driver lists in North Carolina, and in other states, that draw from those two sources. Significant underrepresentation of people of color has been discovered when those lists have been examined. That has never been done in North Carolina, and that is what Frank and I are working on right now. We are in the process of negotiating a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Transportation to get access to driver information. We are well underway in that conversation, which involves a lot of security protocols and lots of steps that need to be taken to make sure that we can access the data that we need and keep everybody's private information private. But at the end of the day, we want to be able to tell North Carolinians, county by county, how inclusive their jury pools are, and start looking at the solutions that are proposed by TREC in a more serious way for additional source lists that could be used, that we know from experimentation in other states and studies in other states have been successful in diversifying jury pools and ensuring that everyone has an equal opportunity to serve in this important role. Frank, would you like to add anything to that? We don't have any news yet as to what we have found because we are still working on the data transfer, but that's step one of the study. We are in active conversation about all of the details of how to make it all work. And Frank and I are happy to take any questions. And Frank, if you have anything to add, I'll pass it over to you.
Sure, thanks. I would just add that it's basically impossible to get the cooperation of the DMV in getting the whole list of drivers. And I really appreciate the support of the Department of Transportation. And I'm sure that came from this committee and the Attorney General's office. It would have been impossible. We don't have the data yet, but it appears like we're going to get it. Once we get it, we can compare county by county the race and ethnicity and gender and age group of our jury master list to the census. And I think that's going to be a fantastic opportunity to assess the accuracy and the representative nature of our jury pools. So that's good for everybody. So thank you for letting us, get this data.
Excellent. Frank and Emily, thank you for taking on this project. And Ellen, thanks for the report. Anybody have any questions of the data team? Yes, Justice Earls.
Thank you. Sorry, I do have a question just about the GCC's Justice Data Portal, and in particular, whether there are plans to make sure that they are including racial data in the statistics that they're gathering.
Yes, I believe so. That was a question that was asked of Michelle at the last one. I think that they had been experiencing some technical issues with some of the data that had come in, so they took it offline for a little bit, but that is in their plans, as well as I think inclusion of traffic stop data is their next sort of tranche of data that's going to come in.
Okay, thanks.
Anything else before we move on? All right, great. We'll move on to the executive committee. And I know Billy wasn't able to join us. Is there someone else who's going to report on the executive committee?
Hi again. Yeah, since Sergeant Garton couldn't be here today, I'll just give a very brief update on his behalf for the executive committee, which, as you all know, is charged with monitoring and advising on the recommendations that relate to the executive branch. So a lot of Department of Public Safety recommendations. And most of you probably know that starting next year, that will be 2 agencies. So they'll continue to be the Department of Public Safety, and there'll be a new Department of Corrections. So I think that will present some challenges, but also opportunities. I know the governor is very interested in elevating the focus on reentry in the new organization. So they're doing a lot of work on that this year. In terms of the committee, I'll just share, we've had 2 meetings since our last full task force meeting. One in May, we brought in the director of the Office of Victim Services at DPS. You'll recall that there was a couple of TREC recommendations related to access to victim compensation and making sure that access is equitable and people in communities across the state can access those funds. And so they talked to us about how they're working to implement that recommendation through outreach. They did a pretty big public awareness campaign over the last year, and technology, they're a little bit behind, but trying to move their process more online to be another way for people to access services, getting rid of the notary requirement, making some changes to make it more accessible. And the team that was there provided some feedback on the work that they're doing and how to improve it, which I think was really helpful. There was also a recommendation on racial equity training, which they have implemented for the staff in that office, which is good. And then the next month in June, we had a larger joint meeting with the SBI Use of Force Center to hear from the FBI on their national use of force data collection efforts. And I think that was timely, just reflecting a lot of interest on behalf of a lot of different stakeholders who want to understand more about use of force data. And in North Carolina, we're having, continuing to have a lot of conversations with partners on what more robust data collection would look like. And I think the SBI Use of Force Center is kind of a leader in that work. So that's just a brief update that I have today. Happy to take questions now or offline.
Thanks so much, Natalia. Anybody have any questions about the executive branch stuff, statewide stuff? All right, great. We'll move on to the local government implementation work. And Mike Hawkins has done such a great job chairing that committee. And Mike, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you, Josh. And I would like to talk about 3 or 4 different things today very briefly, but begin by reminding everyone that the local committee, our mission, the way we see our mission, the way we see our philosophy is it's our role to raise awareness across the state in different areas of the things that TREC has done and the recommendations that TREC has put forth. And we've learned that raising awareness in most cases equals raising support. And so a big part of what we do is simply to try to spread the word. And so with that in mind, I would mention 2 or 3 things that we have done since the last time we've met. We've been quite busy actually over this quarter. One thing I would mention, and if you could put the link in the chat, one thing that our committee has been doing is supporting the staff in the development of model policies. If there's a model policy page on the TREC website, and there's a whole host of model policies there in a number of different areas, local community areas, local government areas, law enforcement areas. And those are designed to aid local decision makers and local communities in kind of best practice concepts on a lot of the different issues that TREC has taken up. As I say, there's a bunch of them on there. There's others that are in the process right now in the pipeline that will be added as the next few weeks and next couple of months go on. But if you get a chance, take a look at that page, and you'll get a sense of some of the things that we've been dealing with the local committee. In relation to the model policies, part of what we do to try and develop these model policies and refine the model policies is we have advisory groups which meet on a monthly basis, who we bring issues before, and they help us think through and talk through the particular complications or intricacies of the issues and help us develop these model policies. One that I would mention in particular is the law enforcement group. We have a law enforcement advisory group, which consists of about 12 or 15 members from across the state, sheriffs, police chiefs, highway patrol officers, administrators, and as I say, they meet monthly. I would say that we have members of our staff as part of those meetings. The Attorney General and Justice Earls are part of those meetings every month, which is a big appeal for these law enforcement people to be able to discuss these issues with the Attorney General, with Justice Earls. But those have been, I would say, quite successful. And Josh and Anita, I hope you would agree with that they have been quite successful. The last meeting that we had, law enforcement meeting that we had last month, at the end of the meeting, one of the sheriffs, who I won't mention his name, but he's a very prominent sheriff in North Carolina. He ended the meeting by saying that meeting was the best meeting he had ever been in on that particular topic, that he'd learned more and that he had gotten more useful information out of this law enforcement advisory group than he had in any of the other meetings, any other interactions he'd had with that topic. The topic that we talked about last month was early warning systems, which is law enforcement agencies are now required by statute to develop processes and systems in which they can oversee their staff to identify issues that might be developing before they become problems, find issues before they become problems. And it was a great conversation, and it involved philosophy, it involved technique, it involved logistics. A big part of it was logistics, and a big part of it is how can the smaller agencies around the state do things that maybe some of the larger agencies are already doing. So anyway, the point being, law enforcement is a great example of bringing people from across the state and, not coincidentally, helping to establish buy-in and support among key stakeholders for a lot of the recommendations that TREC has put forward. We also have a victims advisory group that is a little bit different. The structure is a little bit different, but they also meet on a monthly basis, and they talk about things like violence prevention, restorative justice, again, with the same concept of trying to help us come up with model policies and come up with ideas that we can use as TREC as an organization, also for them to understand what TREC is doing and hopefully serve as ambassadors for TREC and for the outcomes that TREC has been advocating. Holly Jones has worked on outreach, has done great work in reaching out to different organizations. Part of our strategy is we think local officials, local elected officials have to understand what TREC's doing. And so we have presented to all kinds of organizations, all kinds of entities. Judge Thornburg back last spring or summer or last fall, I can't remember what it was, when Judge Thornburg and Holly and I presented to, I think it was the County Clerks Association that was meeting up in Asheville. But organizations like this, we're doing that, which leads to the last thing that I'll mention, and that is next month, the Association of County Commissioners will have their annual meeting in Concord. We have a segment in that program in which we are going to be presenting in a breakout session on a couple of topics, one being Mary Pollard, who is a TREC board member. She's going to be presenting on public defenders. The Attorney General mentioned earlier about the budget item that expanded one of the districts to have public defender, additional public defender. Our goal is to have a public defender, a dedicated public defender in every county in the state. And so Mary's going to be talking about that a little bit. We will also be talking about diversion programs, which is a topic that is of really great interest with local elected officials. And we're going to try and present to them, okay, if you're interested in it, how do you start? And try to get that going. I think, Josh, that's other than I want to mention the names of the people who are on our committee because they've done a ton of work and continue to do a ton of work. Deborah was asked a question earlier. Deborah Dix Maxwell is a member. Ronnie Smith, I mentioned Ronnie, he's a member. Gerda Stein, Chief Hawkins, Gina Hawkins is a member. Director Smythe, Jeff Smythe is a member, and Angelica is a member, Angelica Wynn. And then the staff people, which would be Holly and Jasmine and Greg and Ellen primarily, as well as the Attorney General and Justice Earls, who are at almost every one of our meetings. So thanks to all of them, and thanks to everyone. And if there are any questions, Jasmine will be happy to answer.
Great report, Mike. And before I see if anybody has any questions, just an additional word on the law enforcement advisory group, and there's actually a prosecutorial advisory group as well. So many of the recommendations we made don't require a state law. They can be implemented by a local law enforcement agency or by a local DA if they think it's a good idea. And that's why we've come up with model policies, is to help do some of the research and thinking on issues that we've made recommendations about, to try to make it easy for the agencies that want to go in this direction to have resources that they can go forward. And the whole purpose behind having advisory groups of prosecutors and law enforcement officials, Sheriff Burkhead, I want to thank you for all your contributions to that work, that it makes sure that whatever the product is actually operational. It's been through scrub by people who do this work on a daily basis. And so it just sharpens the quality of our product. And so that's how we're trying to get more stuff implemented at the local level. Anybody have any questions for Mike or Jasmine? All right, we will go on to our last TREC update from the Judicial Committee. And Judge Clark, are you presenting?
I think so. Thank you, Attorney General Stein. So my presentation is brief, but I do want to give a report about the May 25th fines and fees training. Professor Markham did a great job at the School of Government and invited several judicial districts in to discuss the impact of fines and fees, also ability to pay, avenues for relief, alternatives to imposing fines and fees, collection priority, and also notice. But present were defense attorneys, prosecutors, judges, and clerks, and it was really good to hear the perspective of other individuals responsible for making things happen regarding fines and fees. So it's not only about what I say as a judge, but also how it's recorded by the clerk on the judgment. There were some really good questions raised by those present regarding the revised AOC form, the 415, that our committee has discussed a lot, which is a request for relief from fines and fees and other monetary obligations. It's also the second page of that form is an order that's to be signed by the judge. The concerns are about difficulties reconciling the form 415 with Rule 28, which is also a big part of what our committee has been discussing. It appears that throughout the state, perhaps, some judges are not granting motions made on the 415 because they feel the language of Rule 28 doesn't allow for the back-end relief that the form references. Rather, Rule 28 is more of a front-end request, ability to pay consideration, and the 415 is more of a back-end request. So our committee is looking to how to make those two match more, that it's so it's convenient for those involved in this process. Other wish list items that came from this training were dealt with folks on probation. If probation is transferred out of county, those individuals can only make payments to the original county. So it's difficult for folks to travel back and forth. They are allowed to make payments online, but that requires some sort of debit or credit card, which makes it difficult for people to comply with the conditions of probation, if that includes a monetary obligation. Something else that we discussed were attorney's fees. They become a judgment immediately. Attorney's fees do. So as a judge, if I impose attorney's fees and allow the defendant, say, 60 days to comply, once that fee application is filed, it starts accruing interest. So there are some issues that our committee is looking into based on that training and other discussions we've had previously. But the hope is that other judicial districts will attend this training, have these discussions, learn what's working in other counties, other districts, and hopefully make things better for all those involved.
Excellent, Judge Clark. Thank you. Anybody have any questions for the judge? We can turn the tables, ask the judge questions instead of the other. Oh, well, we've got a judge who's comfortable asking questions. Justice Earls.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm sorry, I can't stop myself from asking questions. But this is actually not so much a question as a follow-up, if that's all right, on one of the task force recommendations that I believe I'm correct is within the Judicial Committee purview. But I just want to make this task force aware. One of our early recommendations, I think, or at least one of our fairly unanimous ones, was that judicial system actors should have racial equity training. And there has been in the past few months developments relating to that. And my understanding is that when there was an effort from the School of Government to provide training at district court and superior court judges conferences on, and I don't know if it was implicit bias or if it was racial equity more broadly, but the Administrative Office of the Courts renegotiated the contract with the School of Government, and for the first time in many, many years, took over control of the content of the training for those judges conferences, and then issued instructions that explicitly did not include this as part of the training. And so I tell you that sad tale just to be clear that that recommendation, that we need to find other ways. There's plenty of opportunities for people within the judicial system, I think, to get training on various issues, including this question of implicit racial bias and racial equity. And there are many places it's offered. I think the School of Government can still offer it, just not through those judicial conferences, but that we need to continue our efforts to create, I think the solution is to create an environment in which understanding and having real knowledge about those concepts is considered an important job requirement, and a culture of people should have that knowledge. And I say that in part, I attended a training. So the state of California took a different approach. Their legislature passed a law saying that all judicial system actors have to have implicit bias training. So I attended virtually one of the trainings that was put on by the Equal Justice Society. You know, it's an hour-long video training, just incredible, useful information about the science of implicit racial bias and what it is and what it isn't. I think there's so much misconception. I think that part of the hostility to this training is a total misunderstanding of what the concepts actually mean. But beyond that, it's a very positive training in the sense of, here's what we know about techniques to counter implicit racial bias. Here's what you can do when you are sitting on the bench as a judge. Here's what you can do when you are a clerk of court. Like very positive and useful information, if you will. So I do know that the state bar is considering changing the whole structure of how we do CLE in the state. But part of that change would be there would be a 1 hour that could be either, I think I'm right, that it could be either ethics or substance abuse or racial equity training. And I also think that to some degree, this training is most beneficial for people who volunteer and sign up and say, yes, I want to learn this, even though it might be most needed by people who think they don't want to learn it. But at any rate, I wanted to make all of you aware of that. And the second barrier or challenge we're facing on the question of whether the jury instructions, whether the pattern jury instructions should include a pattern jury instruction on implicit bias. I haven't confirmed this, but I understand that the pattern jury instruction committee was working on an implicit bias jury instruction and then was instructed to not produce an implicit bias instruction. So I don't know, again, this is, I hate to share things that I haven't confirmed 100%, but I just share these to say our continuing work is so important. I'm grateful to all of you for joining us today, and I just wanted to bring those updates to the full body.
Thank you, Justice Earls. Anybody have any questions for Judge Clark or Justice Earls?
And Reginald Boney is going to, you got that program on next Friday, I think the Attorney General mentioned. Was that put in the chat?
Yes, I believe Greg put the registration link up towards the top of the chat, but yes, he did. It's the second link in the chat. I will copy and paste it again.
I would encourage everybody to send them out to any anybody that might be interested in fines and fees issues. That's a very important issue.
Anybody, Reggie, Natalia, Jasmine, can you speak, tell us a little bit more what the agenda is going to be a week from Friday and what information will be imparted? I think that can help us sell it to people.
Sure. So we have a panel of 5 people, and with those 5 people, we have Representative Maury, who will act as the moderator. We have Judge Vince Rozier, Laura Holland from the North Carolina Justice Center. We have Lauren Robbins, who is a litigation paralegal with the ACLU, and she's also a directly impacted person. And we have Vikrant Reddy, who is a senior fellow with the Charles Koch Institute. And so the learning session will cover the impact of unpayable fines and fees in North Carolina, and will focus on driver's license restoration, the economic impact, government reliance on fines and fees, and then we'll convene with discussing strategies for reform with that. And each of the individuals of the speakers have a separate portion that they will speak on. And pulling it up here, we're really excited. And we met with all the speakers last week, and everyone is all set to go. And I'm really looking forward to see what they will have to offer. But Laura Holland will be speaking on the driver's license restoration, and she's done extensive work with Deere and Durham. Vikrant Reddy, he will be making the conservative argument for reform with fines and fees. And he spoke a couple of years ago at the conference they had at the School of Government at Carolina and came highly recommended. And look forward to hearing what he has to say. As I said before, Lauren Robbins will be giving testimony as well, not testimony, but she'll be giving her account as a directly impacted individual. And Judge Rozier will speak on his experience in the district court and the superior court with fines and fees as well.
Excellent. That sounds like a tremendous program. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, at this point, we'll move on to the next part of the agenda, which is our public comment section. And Justice Earls, if it's okay with you, I'll hand it off to you to moderate this part of the agenda.
Great, thank you so much. My understanding is that we have 3 people signed up, but 2 are with us at the moment. And so I'll call first on the first person who signed up, Daniel Bowes. If you want to, think you'll be promoted to panelist and unmute yourself. And then you have 2 minutes to address us. Thanks.
Daniel, give me 1 second. I'm gonna spotlight you for everyone. There we go. Great.
Okay, thank you. Hello, my name is Daniel Bowes. I serve as a Director of Policy and Advocacy at the ACLU of North Carolina. Let me just start by thanking Justice Earls for the transparency that you displayed a few minutes ago. I think that it is helpful to see what's actually happening and to be able to bring sunlight into those situations and concerted advocacy. So thank you for sharing that information. The main reason I wanted to join today was to really praise Representative Maury and Senator Mohammed, who I just saw do everything they possibly could during the legislative session to stop bad bills and to confront bad actors. As I'll always point out, at the Conference of DAs and Sheriff's Association at the legislature, and also do their best to promote, true bills that are good. And so I really want to thank them for that because, they did it different ways. I appreciated Representative Maury brought the fire on the floor of the House. We're thinking about making a video of the sort of best moments there, and saw Senator Mohammed really have to go about it completely differently and sort of in a very sort of humble, behind the scenes way, but both were very effective. And I just know that it takes a lot of humility to do that when you're getting criticism from all sides. So thank you for that. And then Tara and Kerwin are always much appreciate the legislature. I'm not doing the best time keeping track of my time, so I don't know how much time I have left. I'll just emphasize that I really hope that TREC can continue in as public a format as possible, because it has been, as much as I criticize it for not doing more, or in certain situations, and I don't criticize the committee itself, but certain actors where I just don't think they go hard in the paint enough, especially against law enforcement. But it's been incredibly helpful. House Bill 560, which Kerwin has talked about a lot, others, that was a triumph of this session where, DPS was going to do mandatory minimums and make it harder for people to claim property who are in prison for their lost property or damaged property. And because of TREC's attention to that matter, it stopped it. And so those are, I'm very grateful for that. And I think it's going to be more important as a radical Supreme Court is, teeing up foundational rights and knocking them off one after the other. And so I think that racial equity in the criminal justice system, which is how we deprive people of rights these days, is really going to be more crucial. So I would just end by saying that, the Constitution is not going to save us. It requires people to be courageous and go to the state legislature. And really hope that TREC can continue to be a partner there.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your perspective and your continued engagement with us. Then I think our next person is Katrina Hayes. You'll be promoted to panelist, and then you can unmute.
Good morning. I'm Katrina Hayes, autism advocate, coach, speaker, author. My story of chronic injustice is in Kevin's Powell, 2020, the year that changed America. I am no stranger to the comment portion. 2 years ago today, a malicious CPS report was filed on me due to my medical advocacy for my son. My son was placed out of my care into the care of a family member for 3 months. Recently, I informed Attorney General Josh Stein that UNC Children's Behavioral Health contributed to ACEs when they denied my son mental health treatment on the day of his appointment. That situation is one of the situations we were retaliated against for bringing light to it. Here's a list, not a complete list, of individuals who have been willing to disregard the law, waste significant amounts of money, and sell their souls. Cumberland County Schools spent close to $60,000 in legal fees to hide the public school abuse. Superintendent and Pastor Marvin Connolly, Judge Selena Brooks, Judge George B. Collins, Judge Deborah Sassier, Attorney James Middlebrooks, Attorney Robert C. Ekstrand, Attorney David Nolan, Review Officer Joe Waters, multiple staff members at Safe Child, North Carolina, and CPS. Deborah Sassier's behavior was particularly outlandish, petulant, and maniacal. Play the recording. Because Attorney Josh General has not stepped in, the culprits now seek to violate our privacy in other ways. This mail was sent to both my home address and a family member's address, exposing my son's social security number. One is stapled to an envelope, and the other one, the Postal Service put in a clear envelope that says "We care." These are clearly attempts to evoke rage. There's a saying, a wise man will be master of his mind, a fool will be its slave. I'm a Brooklyn, New York girl residing in North Carolina, and I still respect the Attorney General in New York, Letitia James, who's not afraid to seek justice and come against government corruption. She's an excellent model. The laws are clear, Attorney Josh General. What's the holdup? Thank you for your time.
And thank you for bringing that to our attention. And I'll say, as I always do, if you have comments in writing that you also want to submit to us by email, I think that email address is on our website, ncdoj.gov/TREC, and we always welcome written comments as well. As I think that concludes our public hearing portion. We don't have anyone else who's here. So I before wrapping up, I want to first invite any task force members. Is there sort of any other business? Is there anything you want to make sure we hear about at this general meeting? Anything you should bring to our attention? Well, I won't impose on people's time any longer. Attorney General Stein, do you want to give us any closing observations?
I do. Thank you, Justice. I want to thank the two speakers in our public comment section. I especially want to thank Greg Jackson, Cedric Harrison, and Judge Jay Corpening for their presentations in the first half of today's meeting. Very inspiring to know this work is going on here in North Carolina and across the country, but we care more about North Carolina. And there's real hope, and we need to build the momentum and keep it going so that more and more communities are doing this type of innovative work. Of course, I want to express my appreciation to the task force members for your participation today, but more importantly, for the work that you do regularly on behalf of the task force and in your communities. For informational purposes, our next and final task force meeting of the year is going to be October 7th at 10 a.m. October 7th at 10 a.m. So put that in your books. And then we're going to also work for an in-person gathering of task force members in December in a more social context. And more details on that will follow. And those are my comments, Justice Earls. I don't know if you wanted to offer any concluding remarks as well.
I do, and thank you for that. I certainly want to add my appreciation to all of you for all the hard work. I am aware that there are many other task force and committees and commissions, and I just continue to be impressed with the amazing work that we've been able to do, and we've really been able to show that implementation through this type of format, working together, can be really effective. What I want to make you all aware of is that the efforts to envision and put in place what's needed for what I guess I'm currently calling TREC 2.0, the next iteration of the task force going forward beyond in 2023 is underway. There are continuing discussions. Some of the principles that I would lay out are that we really do want to build. I think that TREC has a reputation now, has a track record, has people are aware of us, and so we want to build on that. We don't want to lose that. We don't want to end that. And I would especially highlight the work of the advisory groups that has been so powerful. I think we want to see that continue. So the Victims Advisory Group, the Prosecutors Advisory Group, Law Enforcement Advisory Group, those have been really useful, and we want to continue those, as well as the fact that we are a collection of sort of interdisciplinary across different branches of government, different parts of the system, coming together in a way that doesn't happen elsewhere in the state. And so we want to continue that. In addition, a core principle is we need staff. We've only been able to do what we're doing because of the incredible work of the staff that have devoted so much time and effort to this. And while some of them may move on in their careers, can't understand why they would want to do that, but that's a principle. We understand that to be effective, we need to have staff. And so a huge part of the effort is looking for funding. And I've been talking with various foundation funders and other sources that might fund a staff. And so if any of you have any suggestions or ideas along those lines, let me know. But those are the kinds of things that are in the works. And I anticipate by October to have much more concrete detail about what this effort will look like in the new year. So that is all that I have. And I think unless there's any other questions or comments, I think I'll turn it back to the Attorney General to adjourn us.
Yes, we adjourn, and I want to thank everyone again, and hope you have a great lunch, a wonderful Friday afternoon, and a good weekend. Thanks, everybody.